Kia ora koutou. Welcome to the TeLENZ Legal Tech webinar series. My name is Wayne Rumbles, Associate Professor at Te Piringa Faculty of Law at the University of Waikato. I am the project leader of the Technology and Legal Education for New Zealand project, or TeLENZ, funded by the New Zealand Law Foundation as part of the Information, Law and Policy project. Technological developments do and will continue to raise issues and challenges for government, business and civil society, and have implications for both legal education and legal practice. The law faculties are in a strong position to prepare law graduates for legal practice and IT-driven changes now and into the future. The vision for the project is that all law students in New Zealand are exposed to technology and legal innovation throughout the core law curriculum. To achieve this vision, TeLENZ has teamed up with academics from across the 6 New Zealand law schools to build greater digital capacity and to develop a set of tools and resources that any academic can use to integrate technology and the impact of technology into their core law courses. The project has 3 strands: the creation of teaching resources and the development of New Zealand-specific research in the area of legal tech, and thirdly, the creation of networks and dialogue between academics, practice, and tech providers, both nationally and internationally. Today, it is my great pleasure to welcome you to the TeLENZ Legal Tech webinar series.
Today, it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker for the second TeLENZ Legal Tech webinar, Associate Professor Alex Sims from the Department of Commercial Law at the University of Auckland's Business School. Alex is a research associate of the UCL Centre for Blockchain Technologies, a New Zealand representative on the OECD's Blockchain Expert Panel Advisory Board, a member of the Blockchain NZ Executive Council, and is a member of NZ International Review Group for the ISP TC 307 Blockchain and Distributed Ledger Technologies. So Alex is more than qualified to talk to us today about blockchain and distributed ledger technology and how these impact on several areas of law. It's with great pleasure that I welcome Alex.
Hey, thank you, Wayne. Right, okay. So this is just a quick outline of what I'll be doing. So looking very quickly at blockchain's origins, also how early technologies are treated. It's been no different with blockchain. And also explain that blockchain is not just about making current systems more efficient, because if you've got a flawed system, you make it faster, it's not all that useful. Very quickly about digital identity and smart contracts, because that's the key to using blockchain's many uses. Some of the areas in which blockchain could affect the law, allowing new ways of doing things. This is just some. I mean, there's lots more, but I could spend the whole talk on each topic. So just looking very, very briefly at them. And also, again, quickly dispelling some arguments made against blockchain. So, blockchain's origins. Well, Bitcoin, which is a cryptocurrency, created the first blockchain. So blockchain did not exist beforehand. And while it was used as a cryptocurrency, there are a whole lot of other uses that we can see, although cryptocurrencies can still play an important part. Bitcoin was first proposed, someone released a white paper, they're anonymous, meant to be Satoshi Nakamoto. No one knows if it's a person or a group of people. And the actual blockchain, Bitcoin one, was released into the wild. Not many people knew about it. So when people say it's been around for 10, 11 years and not much has happened, well, no one really knew about it for the first 4 or 5 years. And blockchain itself is a combination of many existing technologies and clever incentives. So some people say there's nothing new about this. It's just existing technology. But it's the way it's been packaged and can do things we could not do before. And that's a link to the white paper. Now, it's from a book, which I'll put the title up in a second, but cryptocurrency and blockchain have been described as the first technology that's just fundamentally difficult for otherwise intelligent and highly capable people to comprehend. Now, I've had people say, oh, yes, we've had all this other technology which is just difficult, but this is different because it's not just the technology, it is what it allows us to do. I mean, people struggle with the internet, and the internet's actually very simple. It's 2 computers talking to each other. Blockchain is a lot more conceptually hard for people to get their brains around. Someone I know told me the other day that it's been 2 years, that they're a bright person, 2 years, and they've finally started to understand it. that's, and some people, yes, you can understand a bit of it, but not the whole thing. So it's not just technology at all. And also, this is a bit about early technology. So, at first you had this and you didn't do very much, but of course, in a number of decades, you've got that. So we're still at this stage in the process. And to do with new technologies, cars, for example, were the running butt of a lot of jokes because you had horses that were dependable and you had these useless cars that were breaking down all the time. So this is a horse dealer who's passing by a broken down car and just being sort of nasty about it. Supposedly pull it yourself. Now, 4 years later, the cars become a little bit more sophisticated, but I'll just read it out if you're looking on a phone or something. It's called Fickle Fortune, and the guy standing there in the pouring rain with tools around his feet, obviously not being able to fix it. And he said, and only yesterday I was fined £5 for driving at excessive speed. So the whole joke about this was that they were very unreliable. It didn't work properly, and of course, horses were good. Well, yes, it didn't end up too well for the horses. So this happens with everything. So, yes, blockchain can make our current systems more efficient, but the real value comes through transforming the systems or creating new ones. And just a quick example of this is an old steam engine from an old factory. So, steam engines were this marvel of innovation and, they allowed, industrial revolution and things. But they were very noisy, the steam engine, and they had a whole lot of pulleys coming off them, and they were used to drive smaller machines around the outside. And when electric motors came around, it was like, whoa, we can get rid of this big thing. But what did they do? They just recreated it and put a more efficient machine in the middle, and you still had the problem. If it stopped, everything else stopped. Now, some people said, well, why don't we rip out the big thing and just put a smaller motor in each of the machines so you don't have the central one? And there was 30 years of people arguing against it. And so, even when people see sort of a new way of doing things, there's a lot of resistance to change. Now, one of the things with blockchain is it can move us from, don't be evil to can't be evil. This is someone else saying this, not me. So at the moment, our current systems are a bit like Monopoly. So you've probably all had, discussions with people when you play Monopoly about what the rules are, and I say discussions, arguments, and then you've got to make sure the bank is not stealing money, and that's how currently things work. And people might get away with all sorts of things. Whereas using blockchain is a bit like playing a computer game like Pac-Man. You can't, cheat. You can't do anything. You can only do what's programmed. I mean, that can be good and bad because you've actually got to program things properly. And just quickly with that, as someone pointed out to me the other day, well, a normal computer game can be hacked, and they are hacked. But with a blockchain, even if you hack one or two computers, you're not hacking the whole system. So they're actually far more secure than just one normal game. So what is a public blockchain? Well, blockchain is just one particular type of technology out of distributed ledger technology. So it's a very wide thing. Blockchain is just one narrow part, but most people call the whole area blockchain, which I will be doing. And essentially what blockchain is a decentralized database that stores data in a way that allows read and write access. So it doesn't say delete. You can only append stuff at the end. So if there is a record that's wrong, it's changed later, well, you can see the later change, but also the original one. Another way of thinking about it is if you think about, Google Docs online, you've got the Google Docs, which you're all seeing the same version, which is on Google servers, whereas with the blockchain, everyone that's on that has their own particular copy that is updated in real time. So it's completely different. Now, I've got in brackets about some people just viewing other people's copies. Well, that's because especially the Bitcoin blockchain is very, very big and you won't have it on your mobile phone. So what you might end up is basically, linking and seeing someone else's copy, but that doesn't really matter. Now, the thing is if everyone's got their own copy, what's to stop someone from, making up, for example, with Bitcoin, they've got a million Bitcoin and trying to spend them. Well, if you want to make a change, for example, you've gone and hacked your own copy and then you're trying to send some Bitcoin, which you don't actually own, to someone else, before that transaction is effected, a check is done of everyone else's copies, and it's like, no, you don't own that 1 million Bitcoin, and it won't go through. So that's sort of the magic about it. And also that spreadsheet can be designed to interact with the real world. So say, for example, insurance, and insurance is one of the areas that people are looking at. You could have an insurance contract. The farmer could have an insurance contract that says that if they don't get a certain amount of rain, and that is measured by certain rain gauges around the district, in a certain time period, then there's an automatic payout in the insurance contract. And so those rain gauges will have a little Internet of Things device, and that will be feeding data in. So that's an example there. So someone doesn't need to say, look at the rain gauge and then make the payment. It's all done automatically. Now, there are hundreds or if not thousands of different blockchains. Some are very similar, others are very different, and almost all are open source. So when someone says they're going to put something on their blockchain, it's not one blockchain. It depends which blockchain you're using. And the reason why some are very similar is you can just copy because it's open source. So you may have exactly the same, or you might make some changes to it. But with blockchain, it's, you going off and making your own thing is not actually all that useful because it's a network effect. So you need lots of different people to be having their own copies, to be nodes. Because if you've only got a few, it's not very, it can be hacked quite easily. So you don't really want to be making your own thing. And this is why if you're a company, you don't make your own blockchain. You need other people to work with you, so you've all got to be using the same thing. Now, you can have a blockchain that is permissioned. So I've looked about, the first bit was about public. These ones now are about permissioned. So you can limit who can read and write to it. So you might have an industry-wide, so only people in that industry can actually even just view it. And Hyperledger Fabric is probably the most well-known, and that is what IBM uses for lots of different industries. Now, people that are providing services infrastructure for permissioned blockchains, basically all the big tech companies and the big four accounting firms, they're all into doing consulting. And also, the big players are not necessarily all using just permissioned blockchains. So if you've got time, have a look at WorldWire. It's a competitor to Swift, the banking service, and it's using a cryptocurrency called Stronghold USD. Now, I've bolded stablecoin because one of the criticisms of things like Bitcoin and Ethereum, cryptocurrencies, is they fluctuate in price. Well, a stablecoin doesn't. So here it's pegged to the US dollar. You've got one Stronghold USD that equals $1. And interestingly, the central banks are now, some of them actually trying to stop the use of stable coins because that's actually the biggest threat to the fiat currency than actual other cryptocurrencies because their prices are so volatile. Now, the two key things that are needed for blockchain to be really useful are digital identity and smart contracts. So digital identity. Well, digital identity of people, organisations and things is the key to many of the uses of blockchain. So we've already looked at an example of a thing. Those rain gauges, they can have their own digital identity, and you want them because you want to be able to identify that those particular rain gauges are the ones that are measuring the rainfall in that area and not some rain gauges somewhere else. Now, it's slightly ironic given that blockchain was first meant to be anonymous or pseudonymous. And digital identity is really important, not just to blockchain, but many of our current systems. I mean, proving who someone is a real headache, and even then you may get it wrong, and a lot of money is wasted through verifying people. There's lots of different identity solutions, and also the Department of Internal Affairs in New Zealand is also working this area because it could save significant costs to the government if we have digital identity and for payments and all sorts of things. And in fact, this has just come out this week. The second link there, the first link is for a cabinet paper confirming the DIA's Digital Identity Trust Framework for New Zealand. Unfortunately, RealMe will be part of it, but they're also looking at private providers as well. So what about smart contracts? Well, the smart contracts are just self-executing computer programs. So, if X happens, then do Y, etc. So, for example, with that insurance thing, if the rain is below a certain amount, then pay out. They may or not be legal contracts. Some are and some are not. At first, there were some people saying they may never be a legal contract, but everyone basically saying, well, yes, they can be, provided you meet the requirements of the contract. I'm not going to look into smart contracts for this particular talk. That's a whole other talk. Now, the key thing with the smart contract is once it's set in motion, one party can't, for example, turn around and say refuse. What they'll do is actually send the money into the contract. So, for example, that insurance contract, the money can be sitting there. And so when there's not enough rain, it will be paid out. So the insurance company then can't turn around and say, we're not paying. Yes, I know people will say, but that's not how insurance works. But it doesn't have to work the way it currently works. Not everything can be coded ahead of time. Just like traditional written agreements do not account for every eventuality. And that's where disputes resolution comes in. So at first, some people said, we don't need, smart contracts will do everything. Well, no, they won't. But what they will do is reduce a number of disputes. So then the disputes that you have will be a lot lower. Now, so what I'm going to do is go through some of the areas of the law that can be transformed. So about personal property. Okay, it's a bit of a question. I'm not going to ask you to answer this. Normally I would if this was in real life. But how do you prove you own sort of a car? Now, a lot of people are very confused because they say, oh, well, I'm the registered owner of the car. Well, no, the registered owner doesn't necessarily mean the legal owner. All the registered owner means is that you are responsible for the tickets. We don't have a database for the legal owner in New Zealand. They do in other countries, but not here. So I guess to prove that you own it, you have to come up with receipts or something like that. So it is a little bit messy. So it'd be great that we could actually use blockchain and actually have a registry for car ownership. But what about things that do have a database? So, for example, a patent or registered design, you can see you've got a register there and you can see who the registered owner is. The trouble with that is there is no indivisibility of title. So the person registered as the owner may no longer be the owner. So say, for example, Richmond has a patent and I want to license that off him. And so I go and we enter into a contract and agree all the terms and things, and I start paying him some money. And it turns out that he's transferred the patent to Wayne. So Wayne is now the legal owner. Now, I don't know that, but Wayne can come along and sue me, okay? Because Richmond was not the not the legal owner. Now, sure, I could go and sue Richmond, and much I probably won't because of the costs involved. So it's a very flawed system that we currently have. Now, what we can do is blockchain for accurate asset registries. So what we can do, for example, with that patent is that can be tokenized. So whoever is recorded as the owner of the token for that patent is the owner. And so I can see, Richmond's claiming to be the owner, but in fact it is Wayne. So I can deal with Wayne. So that would be so much better. Someone told me one time that with a registered design, they were dealing with 7 changes of ownership and none of them had been, registered. So this does happen. It's not sort of hypothetical. And this is why you've got to do due diligence and all these types of things, whereas this could just remove all of that mucking around. Now, the other thing is that title, the ownership can be transferred quickly and not without going through a central entity. But in practice, you probably want a permissioned blockchain. Remember, I said before that you can control who does what, so that you still have a central authority or authorities, to record initial ownership. So with a patent, it would be IPONs, Intellectual Property of New Zealand, who would grant the patent in the first place, and also, transfer ownership in narrow circumstances. For example, if the owner went into liquidation or became bankrupt. And of course, if someone challenged a patent and it needs to be revoked, the same thing. Now, what about insolvency? So this is also related to property. Well, insolvency practitioners need to work out an entity's assets. And that's not necessarily easy to do. Who owns what? Because we've got no registries for a whole lot of things. And it happens a lot with, say, construction sites. The construction site's closed, and who owns the tools in that construction site? So there's arguments about who owns what. Again, if we had the ownership of assets recorded on the blockchain, then we know who owns what in seconds. Be much easier for people. And if you're using Internet of Things devices, little tags, you can actually see, oh, this is where everything is, which is much easier to do. Now, another thing with this is because you've effectively tokenized the ownership, someone can't steal their assets, and well, they could physically steal them, but they couldn't sell them to an unwitting purchaser because only the owner could transfer the title and their signatures can't be forged. Now, I know people will be saying, oh, but in law, a thief can never transfer ownership, good title to someone else. Yes, I know that, but you tell the purchaser who has spent a whole lot of money and they lose out. Whereas here, they'll be protected because they can see exactly who the owner is. Now, if you're using cryptocurrencies as well, and actually it's likely for central bank to be issuing cryptocurrencies sooner rather than later. But these will be very sort of carefully controlled ones. So when we talk about these type of central bank issued cryptocurrencies, they're different from something like Bitcoin that nobody controls. So if you are using cryptocurrencies, you can immediately see all the payments made to and from the entity, that's going through insolvency, and track all the payments much, 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 much quicker. And in fact, you can see who they go to as well. And this is one of the differences between a cryptocurrency and normal fiat currency, because yes, you might be able to see one transfer to a bank account, and then if you want to see where that money's gone, you've got to contact the bank and then find out, and it takes a long, long time. Whereas here, you could just see, basically anyone could go in and just track the transactions, which is what some people are worried about because things become a lot more transparent. But it's also why governments really like cryptocurrencies, because they can get a lot more exposure to what's going on. What about the PPSA, Personal Property Securities Act? Now, I mean, when you think about it, how can you have a system where assets are registered under people's names? I mean, it's not like a serial barcode and thing, that it's under people's names. And also people can grant securities over assets they do not own. So in one example, somebody leased a car and they put their name down as a registered owner. But remember, the registered owner is not the same as a legal owner. But then they granted a security over that car. And the wonders of the PPSA allowed the person that granted the security to effectively take that car and sell it. So the real owner lost out. Mind you, saying that, the old system was terrible because you had written in each high court that people had to go along and look at. So it was better than what it was, but it's still pretty bad. If you had asset registries, it would fix the flawed PPSA system. And actually, you probably wouldn't even need to have the PPSA in the first place, because you'd be able to see exactly who had done what on the blockchain. Now, what about land law? You could put land titles on the blockchain. Now, this is happening. Sweden's trial.uk is working on it. People thought it would be the countries with poor rule of law that would use it first, but it's actually the more developed countries. And again, you'd need a permissioned one. So the Land Transfer Office puts the title on and then really transferable. Now, some people say, but why? We've got a good system in New Zealand. Why change it? And in fact, the New Zealand system is quite good looking compared to the rest of the world. It's not terrible, but it could be better. And actually, we've got a problem because our system is quite good, that there's no impetus to really change it. Whereas, a bit of a digression, but I don't know if people know, but in the United States was very slow to get mobile penetration for mobile phones because they had landlines and things. Whereas countries like in Africa that had almost no telecommunication system, all of a sudden their mobile usage was much, much higher because they had not a good system to start off with. So sometimes having quite a good system can actually stop you from adopting a better system. And also, of course, businesses worked just fine before the internet, but now we probably wouldn't want to go back in time. Now, with land law, also of cryptocurrencies, are used, then the payment and transfer to title happens in the same transaction. You can't have one without the other. You could also start to change equitable rules. I mean, I love equity, but you don't necessarily have to have the, in the trust, you don't necessarily have to have one person being the legal owner, the trustee. We can start to change things. You could also have all the documentation for the buildings recorded and all the materials. So you could, in fact, have the land, say the house, as being its own entity. That would make things really interesting. And I've spoken to the Auckland Council. They're very interested, for example, to do with building consents. This small one, mortgage on the blockchain, once you paid it off, automatic discharge. That does not happen at the moment. That's a manual step. You cut down on fraud. You're not having people forging signatures at all. And also cheaper conveyancing, although in New Zealand it's not really the conveyancing that's the issue, it's the real estate agents. Now, IP. So we've already had that example of the patent, so hopefully you've seen that's quite a good example, but there's far more. So what about real-time payments to creators and others? Well, at the moment, it takes months, or if not years, for creators to get royalties, and also a lot of it's siphoned off by different collecting societies. And there's no transparency, so you don't know what you are getting at all. But using blockchain cryptocurrencies, you can get royalties in real time. So when someone does buy a song or album online, when the payment is made, the percentage to the recording artist and the other people happens at the same time. So all those payments. So if I pay the equivalent of 10 New Zealand dollars, and that one payment, some will go to the person providing it online, and some different percentages will go to a whole lot of different people. In fact, the IRD will also get their take in that one payment. And so you can imagine why tax authorities all around the world quite like the look of cryptocurrencies. And of course, music collecting societies are realising they've got to do something, so they're doing their own shared system for this as well. What about licensing? Well, all the terms of the license can be on the blockchain. So coming back to my example of the patents, say now Wayne is the owner, but I find that out, legal owner, and I want to get a license, and I ask Wayne, right, have you granted a license to anyone else? And Wayne can go, no, I haven't granted a license. Turns out later he has. Well, again, I could sue him, but that's not particularly great. What I would like to know is, what's happened? Are there any licenses? Well, you can do that. And also, if you wanted to, you could limit the release. So I wouldn't necessarily know how much the other licensees are paying. It's also visible to all the parties. So, again, you stop the problems with territorial rights clashes, for example. You can also have the automatic royalty payments. So if I'm, for example, if I'm doing 3D printing and I've got the CAD drawings and I get them from the blockchain, then every one I make, for example, if that's the deal, the royalties I pay in real time through to one. Also, you can have notification when the term expires, or you can actually stop someone from using it. So again, if it's a 3D fine printing from the accessing the blockchain, then when it stops, that will actually stop, and I will no longer be able to make any more copies of it. Whereas at the moment, I would have all the drawings, and when the term expires, I've got to be trusted not to make any more of those. If you're interested, look at Poet later. It's a way of people licensing content to be used online. It's very, very clever. Now, you can also have time stamping for documents. So at the moment, you've got sort of these weird systems where, you start to write things and put them in sealed envelopes and send them to the lawyer so you can verify when something was done. If you're interested, look at zero-knowledge proofs. Very, very interesting because you can get it verified that it was something done on this date, but people cannot see what's actually there. But later on, if you want to, in a court case, you can then say prove that that information was done at that time. Now, 3D printing and licensing. Now, this is a real, real as in it was actually done, thing. So this happened in April last year. So what Air New Zealand did was simulate the breaking of a component in the back of a passenger screen mid-flight from Auckland to LA. And so a message was sent from the plane to LA airport saying, look, we've got this broken component, you need to fix it, because as we all know, when we travel, if we ever do travel again, you want your screen to be able to watch movies. So what happened here was the owner of the IP in the drawings of the broken component was contacted, and the CAD drawings were sent for a one-time print, via blockchain to a 3D printer at the LA airport, and so they could print that one copy. Now, normally the owner would never do that. You're never going to release those drawings to someone. So the ramifications are huge, because what that means is that you don't, if you're Air New Zealand, you don't need to have all supply chain issues with having all the different components there, or holding up planes because you haven't got the right components. So the cost savings and the time is just phenomenal. And I mean, they've actually done this. This was last year. Also, if you can do it so they're using a cryptocurrency, you can have it so the payment is done at the same time. So again, you don't have to start doing invoices and all those types of things. So there's very large consequences for that. And if anyone's interested, there's the URL for that story. Now, what about privacy? So privacy, well, it's okay in theory, but the practice is not good. So why is it so bad? Well, if you want to receive a lot of services, you have to give information. So it's often all of this stuff. And your personal information is being held by lots of different entities. It just needs to be, a hack of one of their systems, and your information is out there. And this happens, unfortunately, too often. I mean, there's the law to protect you, but of course the law doesn't actually protect you. Now, because the trouble is you don't control your data, the people who hold it control your data. And so, with blockchain can change that, and I'll see in a second. And there's been massive data breaches, so that's sort of a few in the United States. Now, just quickly with this, you've probably all seen this federated identity, and that is when you want to sign up for something that says, well, just use Google or Facebook. Handy, but you're giving a whole lot of control to other people. The opposite is self-sovereign, so you control your information and grant others the right to check it's correct. So, say, for example, you go into a supermarket and you look, youngish. At the moment, you've got to provide your, some proof. So you show, and you've got to, they can see your date of birth, and they can see, your name and all sorts of things. And they don't need to know any of that. They just need to know, are you over 18 or not? So what you can do using a self-sovereign system is have the information hashed onto your phone, and it will just say, are you over 18, yes or no? And that's all they need to know. And this system is already being used, so you don't need to hand over all that information. Now, some people might be saying, well, hang on, if all that information is in one place, surely that's going to be hacked. But we're not saying one person holding all that information. You have each person holding the information. For example, Civic is one example. So what happens with Civic is that the information is hashed onto your phone, and so even if your phone is compromised, only your information is taken. Now, say that the thing was a supermarket buying alcohol, you might say, well, someone can just take someone else's phone down to the shops. Well, okay, but what you could have is your photo there. So when they come and ask you, you hold up your photo, and then they can see that it's your phone. Now, also dispute resolution. So blockchain can help with that, because even though we have strong and clear laws, they're not much good if you can't enforce them. And also, of course, people don't often know about the law, or if they do, they don't have the resources to enforce their rights. Very, very, very expensive to go to court. So access to justice is a concern. And even those really good free dispute resolution services are expensive to run, and then people don't know about them. Now, there's a whole lot of things. A couple are called Kleros and Aragon, which are trying to provide dispute resolution vehicles, sort of they harness the wisdom of the crowds. Now, it's not just getting everyone to vote. You have jurors who decide disputes, and they have game theory and a whole lot of things. And actually, Kleros has decided almost 400 disputes, and you can have appeals. it's very, I think, very, very clever. And these are disputes that would never go to court anyway, so it's better to have someone adjudicating on them than not. And I'm actually working this area at the moment, and there's some information there. And actually, what's really interesting is there's a handbook there at the bottom, and one of the people who is behind eBay's dispute resolution scheme, which has been feted far and wide, he's one of the most active proponents of this new system because it's a way of actually resolving disputes online. Now, I've just got a few minutes, and there will be lots of questions, to look at some of the arguments and excuses that people make against blockchain. Well, it's all hype. Well, I can't show you this actually because for some reason my sound's not working when I click on links. But just have a look later on when you look about the internet. And this, if you do watch it, it's hilarious. It's from 94 and 95. And they're saying, well, what is this internet? How do you write to it? And it was like, one of the clips says, by the year 2000, every business will be on the internet. And they're all laughing at it. Well, yeah. Governments and large financial corporations are pouring money in. The OECD, everyone like that. So are they wrong? No. Central banks, 80% of the central banks are looking into releasing their own cryptocurrency, for example. Again, but our current systems work well. There's no need to change. Yeah, because you don't know any better. It's just like, wow, your business has worked in the past. Yeah, but the internet has made things, transformed things, this is a good one. Only criminals want to use cryptocurrencies. Well, we've just seen before some of the benefits, the payment of insurance contracts, the royalties, all those types of things. That's a legitimate use of it. And also, if you were really worried about that, you get rid of cash because criminals really love cash, and also close down the banking system because the banking system is rife with criminal activity. And if you've got time, there's a UK Treasury report, about what's going on. And I joke that why would criminals want to learn about cryptocurrencies when the current system works really well for them? Another thing is with quantum computing. When that comes on, won't that break all the blockchains? Well, basically our society would fail because the banks and the credit card provider systems are all using the same encryption. Also, one thing that I've had people say, it's too risky to have things on public blockchains with the risk of forks. If you don't know what a fork is, don't worry, but some of you will know. Well, that's because you're likely to have those assets registered on permissioned blockchains. So it's not a question of putting everything on a public blockchain. Another thing is blockchains are currently slow and expensive to use, but remember, planes and cars were slow and expensive in the beginning. Now, another thing, again, this will go over some people's heads, but things to do with hashes of documents. What that means is that I've said before that everyone's got their own copy, and if people start putting big documents on, that blockchain will get incredibly big and won't be able to go on a normal computer. And so what people do is they will have, say, for example, a written contract. You can run a computer program over that, and it will give you a number, it's long string of letters and numbers, and you can record that, put that on the blockchain. Now, you can't reverse engineer that contract. So if you've got the long string of numbers, it could mean anything. But say 2 months later, someone comes along and says, this is the contract we signed. Well, if you run the same computer program over it, if it comes up with exactly the same string of numbers and letters, it's the same one. But if you've gone and made some changes to it, it will come up with something different, so you know it's not the same one. So that's an example of hashing. And again, people are doing different things. So the different type of blockchains is you don't necessarily need everyone to have the full copy. You may have, it's called sharding, so you might have parts of it. So you could have more information then. Also, another thing is people say, well, how do we trust that the correct information has been entered in the first place? Because remember I said you can't delete it. You can only sort of change or make a note later about the true state of facts. Well, the current systems are not very good at the moment because they can be tampered with. And the thing with, and not everyone has real-time access to information. So yes, when information is on a blockchain, it can't be changed, only a note made about later. So what that actually means is that you actually almost need more trust in the system. So the people putting that information on need to be trusted. And New Zealand, I think we've got a good reputation worldwide for being trustworthy. So especially for food, we'll probably benefit a lot. Quickly, then we will have time. Energy uses a blockchain. Yes, Bitcoin mining uses a lot of electricity, but newer ones don't. And this is the point that people get wrong so much of the time. Still, no, just because you're using a blockchain doesn't mean to say it uses a lot of power. It depends what you are using. Another thing is, if you can see everything on a blockchain, then as a company you wouldn't want to use it, nor as a private person. Well, again, it depends on the type of blockchain. You can have a permissioned one. You could also use those zero knowledge proofs where people can't actually see the information. And also, yeah, the thing about granting people access, and also wanting to keep all that information secret is one type of worldview. And, you know, being transparent is the value is rising. Now, just as a second to last slide, as it says here, unlocking blockchain rest of the surge of technology's value is not the technology itself, but it's people's attitude. So this is a really good book to read. It's not just on blockchain, it's on a whole lot of things. So, you know, people don't want to change. And change and people are actually the hard thing. The easy thing is the technology. And then there's a bit further reading. And that book there, Blockchain and the Law, it's written a couple of years ago, but it's an excellent book to read. Yeah. So I'll go through these questions. Shall I? Okay. So this one from Richmond. I'll comment. Looks like the strength of various property registration systems. Yeah, I think property registration systems is a key place. I think that the moment that land, honestly, would be in New Zealand, would be the some stage, yes, but there's other ones that we should do, especially cars. I mean, I think cars will be really good. What about dogs? You know, a dog registration thing. That would be great. There's a new digital law association starting up. It's mostly from Australia, but it's meant to be worldwide. And we've got a launch in September. So I'll put a link in to a LinkedIn group if people want to have a look at that as well. Simon Gack, trustees in a blockchain are still trustees, but they hold under a multi-signature proof. Okay, yes, multi-signature proof. That's one thing I didn't explain. A lot of things I didn't. What you can have is, at the moment, you've got your trustee, and the trustee is the legal owner, and so they can sell the land to somebody else. And that, as long as the purchaser didn't know about the trust, they will get the land. But what you can do here is you can have multi-signature, and so the trustee and the beneficiaries need to sign it in order for it to transfer to another party. So that's another way of doing it, which is very, very clever. Insolvency. If I was hiding my assets, why would I willingly agree to submit their identification to a blockchain registry? Okay. Yeah, I'll think about that and I'll come back to them. The Sweden, yeah, that's what I was saying with in New Zealand, that it's not sort of a high priority one. And for that one. Okay, so Robert's replying to one. Yeah, so Robert's question to everyone and Simon is, yes, there's sort of a tension here because the first conception of blockchain and the main one is having no central authority at all. What I'm talking about is in some ways having a central authority there. And I think that it's going to take a long time to have systems, especially with property, that are recognised by the sort of outside world that are public, and I think you need the transition. That's why you'd have a permissioned one until later on. The scalability point, yes, at the moment it's a technical constraint but it's not the end of the world. Robert is the one that can, if Robert wants to hop on, the advances are, coming thick and fast, and it's not, my argument is it's not the technical so much as people not wanting to change. So Robert, do you want to say something about the more modern blockchains?
Sure, I can say stuff about that. There's a couple of ways of looking at this. First of all, you're not putting everything onto the blockchain. The blockchain is basically a transaction register which may point to other packets of data, etc. Scalability issue-wise, largely most of the stuff is, that argument is coming out of the Bitcoin sort of 10-minute process, but also Ethereum sort of 20-second transaction processing time. The number of transactions that you can process is a bit of a vanity metric, because it really depends on what you're actually trying to process and what you're actually trying to do. There's a lot of ways in which you can mitigate those problems. At the core level, there's also something called sidechains, which alleviate those. So different forms, they've got different names like lightning channels, sidechains, all sorts of different forms. The idea here is to both speed up the amount of transactions that are occurring in a private sense or a small group situation, and then anchor those at either end in terms of what processes, overall processes being completed, anchor the two ends within a respective blockchain that's going on. So scalability, I think, is a bit of a red herring, and will be addressed and is being addressed quite substantially in different and newer forms of technology. So I'm not overly concerned about that. I'm trying to avoid going into any sort of technical component.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the ones I should have put at the misunderstandings. It's not. It's trying to get, for example, in an industry, trying to get everyone to agree to use it is the real issue. People just don't necessarily want. I mean, yeah, because they've got their systems, and it means cooperating with everyone, and you're not going to necessarily get your share of everything. But if you think at the moment, everyone's got their own systems, and you have to do all this reconciliation and double check that everything's right, and even then it's not right. Here you've got the same set of information that you're looking at. And actually, the thing that Robert was saying before about having information, what we call off-chain. So, for example, there's an interplanetary file system, IPFS, and that can hold a whole lot of the information as well. So, yeah, you don't have to have the information there coming to a privacy point. In fact, you don't want to have a whole lot of information on that on the blockchain, which I should have mentioned.
Alex, since you mentioned that zero knowledge proofs and stuff like that, they're actually also a performance enhancement. One of the big things is something you may or may not have come across is called zero knowledge proof rollups. And basically they can summarize a whole lot of transactions over a period of time, and you can prove that those transactions occurred, but the actual amount of data that's involved in doing that is very, very small.
Yes, that's what I was, and also, yeah, so it's with the zero knowledge proof, then it's not just the size of the transaction, but also the the privacy as well. Now, the thing about doxing others on the blockchain, well, that comes back to how much information you've got there, and you probably won't have a whole lot of the information there because it will be what we call off-chain. Melanie, one of the problems of building a register of copyright ownership and using blockchain, for example, was difficulty of getting rights owners to record their ownership interests. I'll send you some stuff actually later. There's a whole lot of work being done on copyright and blockchain. So it's, and I know, for example, with the streaming services and things, it's been a nightmare because songs have had all the different information. But that's if you start to have digital identity, for example, of a song, then that would make it a lot easier. So you don't have to have that manual typing; it will just have its own identity.
Thanks, I'll just read it out. Thanks, Alex. It does seem to be one of the areas that blockchain could make a huge difference in distribution of fees, etc. Can you talk about one blockchain example that has scaled and is being used en masse today?
The ones that are being used en masse are the more permissioned ones. So, for example, if you look at Food Trust, which is IBM, so it's being used in Walmart and things like that. And actually, if you go on to LinkedIn and start liking some of the blockchain things, you'll get a lot through your feed. So it's being used in I guess it's still testing by very large companies. So, but again, that's the permissioned ones. But to be realistic, companies much prefer to use a permissioned one at the moment rather than a public one. But that will happen, and I use that example of WorldWire with Swift and the Swift sort of competition is using a cryptocurrency, and it didn't actually need to use a cryptocurrency because it was using a Hyperledger Fabric, and it didn't have to use one at all. But it is using one, and I think the reason why is because it becomes more sort of trustworthy, because you're not just trusting IBM, you're actually using a third party or cryptocurrency. So a bit more sort of security and faith in the system.
And can I just drop in on that one a little bit? As I said before, that sort of the scalability aspect is a bit of a red herring. And in the case of the stuff that Alex was just talking about there, say, for example, on supply side things, TeLENZ is a good example, which is an IBM one to handle the freight forwarding, so international shipping components. These are essentially private or blockchains. They're being used by a small cohort of people to help them orchestrate and collaborate around particular business processes. So in this sense, they're using a blockchain technology component to create a fairly well-defined network in order to process a lot of transactions. And when you're doing that sort of situation where you've got, at least the entities involved, they may be legal persons such as corporations, and there's an existing trust relationship between them, but you mutually distrust them to necessarily complete their transactions appropriately for whatever reason. Therefore, we can process a lot of business transactions using the technology to do that. At the other extreme end, well, actually, you can go a little bit further to that end. There's actually a strong reason for using this technology internally to a corporation, any of their technical systems, because one of the biggest threats to privacy and indeed any fraud and stuff like that is actually the insider threat. It's very easy to go in and manipulate data and change things around to coordinate activities to your advantage. So even using a completely and utterly private blockchain makes a lot of sense, because this technology actually helps to secure that and make that process a lot difficult. It's actually relatively easy to go in and change a database when it's not properly secured. But at the other extreme are the completely open and private, public ones, which is what most people think about when we talk about a blockchain, which is the Bitcoin, the Ethereum sort of components. Their trust environment means that we mutually distrust everyone. And the attacks and the ability to attack the system is extreme. So therefore, we have to trade off security with performance criteria and whatever those are. So in between those two polar off at that spectrum, there's a whole lot of different mixes where the technology can be employed, or the technology type or architecture, or whatever you like to call it, can be deployed in different ways. And that what is being done at the moment. And then there's a kind of a second layer that's sort of just coming through and emerging, which is the idea of inter-blockchain connectivity or communication. That is being able to take one asset that occurs or has occurred, set of transactions, or an asset that's on one blockchain, and represent it on another, so that it can be used in different ways. At the moment, most of this sort of activity and occurrence, and where there's a huge amount of volume, is in a very sort of speculative area, which tends to be where things happen anyway. And that speculative area is known currently as DeFi, or decentralized finance. And there's a huge amount of activity that is exploring a lot of these sort of areas at the moment that are treating things from a financial and speculative side of things, purely to try and build wealth. But as a result of doing that, that starts to embed an understanding of technology where it can be applied across the board, because of this technology is just generic. It can be used in a lot of different contexts and situations.
Yeah, so I just will wind up. But I think a really good way to think about blockchain is a general purpose technology. So that's why, as Robert said, it can be used across many, many, many different things. And also, as I said before, the technology's really moved on, and some people are still sort of thinking back blockchain time. I mean, it's a bit like, I describe Bitcoin as a bit like a Model Ford. It's slow, dependable, and then you've got these sort of Lamborghinis that are running around. So, things have moved on very, very quickly. Anyway, better stop.
Okay, so thank you, Alex. That was great. And if you could forward your slides to me, and then I'll forward them to all the participants as well. And thanks for your contribution, Robert. And look out for the next webinar, which will be in about a month's time. Thanks, everyone.
Cool. Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks, Alex.